Sometimes the greatest inventions begin with the smallest annoyances. Something as simple as a burr stuck to your pants. One day, a man returned from a walk and started pulling the prickly burrs off his clothes. But instead of feeling irritated, he became curious. Today, we'll tell the story of how an ordinary thorny weed inspired one of the most practical inventions of modern life, the hook and loop fastener known as Velcro. A closure you've probably used hundreds of times without even thinking about it. This fastener is called Velcro, often known simply as a hook and loop closure. Two strips of fabric press together and instantly stick. Pull them apart, and they separate just as easily. It seems incredibly simple. But behind that simplicity lies a story that took nearly a decade to unfold and began with one remarkably careful look through a microscope. To understand where it all began, we need to travel back to Switzerland in 1941. Meet George de Mestral, an electrical engineer with a curious mind and a passion for innovation. He had been fascinated by invention since childhood. In fact, at just 12 years old, he received his first patent for a toy airplane design. Creating and improving things came naturally to him. It was a part of who he was from an early age. De Mestral grew up near the city of Lausanne. To help pay for his education, he took on various jobs while studying, and eventually earned his engineering degree. But his most important quality wasn't his education, it was his habit of asking questions. Where most people saw ordinary everyday things, he saw problems waiting to be solved. He had a knack for noticing details others overlooked and turning simple observations into opportunities for invention. On that autumn day, de Mestral set out on a hunting trip in the Swiss Alps. Accompanying him was his dog, an Irish pointer. Picture the scene: a mountain forest, crisp, cool air, and the rustle of fallen leaves beneath their feet. Man and dog make their way through tall grass and dense brush. It seemed like an ordinary day, nothing unusual, nothing remarkable. But it was this very day that would change everything. When the walk was over, de Mestral noticed something familiar to anyone who has ever walked through fields or tall grass. His trousers were covered with small, prickly burrs. His dog's coat was covered with them too. They were burdock burrs. Most people would simply brush them off and forget about them. But this time, things would unfold differently. But what exactly is a burdock burr? It is the seed-bearing fruit of a plant known as burdock. That prickly little ball is actually the plant's fruit. Inside are the seeds. On the outside are dozens of tiny spines. And each of those spines is, in fact, a miniature hook. That hook has one simple yet ingenious purpose. A plant cannot walk. It cannot carry its seeds to new places on its own. So nature came up with a clever solution. The burr's tiny hooks latch onto an animal's fur or a person's clothing and hitch a ride. Mile after mile, they travel with their unsuspecting carrier. Eventually, they fall off somewhere far away. That's how burdock spreads its seeds across the landscape. A free ride, courtesy of someone else. But that evening, de Mestral didn't simply brush the burrs away. Instead, he asked himself a question that would change his life. Why do they stick so firmly? They're not glued on, they're not sewn on, and yet they cling with remarkable strength. Most people would never stop to ask that question. He did. De Mestral was an engineer, and he knew that every effective mechanism has a structure behind it. If these burrs worked so well, there had to be a reason. To find it, he needed the right tool. He took a microscope, placed a burdock burr beneath the lens, and leaned in for a closer look. What he saw amazed him. Under the microscope, the burr was no longer just a burr. At the tip of each tiny spine, de Mestral saw a miniature hook, small, curved, and perfectly shaped. And there weren't just dozens of these hooks. There were thousands. An entire army of microscopic fasteners packed onto a single seed. And then de Mestral realized the key insight. The secret wasn't glue. It wasn't some sticky substance. The secret was shape. The tiny hooks caught onto loops, onto strands of fur, onto the fibers of fabric. They held on not through chemistry, but through geometry. It was a simple idea. But it was the idea that opened the door to an invention. What if this could be recreated by human hands? What if one strip were covered with tiny hooks, just like those on a burdock burr, and a second strip were covered with soft loops, like the fibers of fabric or a dog's fur? Press them together, and they hold. Pull them apart, and they separate. Then do it again, and again, and again. The idea had been born. Now all that remained was to turn it into reality. That was easy to say. Doing it was another matter entirely. De Mestral was full of enthusiasm. At first, he believed the solution would come quickly. But nature guarded its secret more closely than he had imagined. Years of trial and error lay ahead, nearly a decade. 10 years spent trying to create 2 simple strips of fabric that today cost only a few cents. The first problem was scale. The hooks and loops simply didn't fit together properly. Sometimes the hooks were too large for the loops. Other times the loops were too large for the hooks. They either failed to catch at all or tore apart with the slightest movement. Replicating nature's precision proved far more difficult than de Mestral had expected. The second challenge was the material itself. What could these hooks actually be made from? De Mestral experimented with cotton. At first, it seemed like a practical choice, but cotton was simply too soft. The tiny hooks wore out quickly. They bent, flattened, and lost their grip. After only a few uses, the fastener stopped working. He needed a different material, something strong, durable, and able to retain its shape. Then the era itself came to the rescue. It was the 1940s, a time when new synthetic materials were beginning to emerge. One of them turned out to be exactly what de Mestral needed: nylon. It was strong, resilient, and highly resistant to wear. Most importantly, it possessed the crucial property he had been searching for: shape retention. Bend a tiny hook made of nylon, and it remains a hook. Again and again, use after use. De Mestral teamed up with a skilled weaver. Together, they worked step by step to create nylon hooks that were strong, uniform, and remarkably durable. But the hooks were only half of the solution. They also had to develop the second strip, the one the hooks would latch onto, a soft fabric covered with thousands of tiny loops. At last, the two halves came together. But what should this new invention be called? De Mestral was a French speaker, and he decided to combine 2 French words. Velours means velvet, a soft, plush fabric. Crochet means hook. Velours plus crochet became a single, simple name: Velcro. The name captured the essence of the invention itself, a soft fabric held together by tiny hooks. In the early 1950s, de Mestral secured a patent for his invention. The long journey had finally reached its first major milestone. An idea born from a burr stuck to a pair of trousers was now officially protected. Soon, a company would be established to manufacture the fastener and introduce it to the world. But success did not come overnight. At first, people didn't quite know what to make of it. The new fastener looked unusual. Some dismissed it as a novelty. Zippers and buttons were familiar. But this fuzzy-looking strip of fabric, what was that supposed to be? The invention needed time to find its place in the world. And eventually, it did. To understand just how unusual this fastener was, it's worth returning to its greatest advantage. There were no small parts to line up, no zipper to guide into place, no button to push through a hole. Just press the 2 strips together, and they fasten instantly. A child can use it, an elderly person can use it. Even someone with their hands full can use it. Its greatest strength was its simplicity. Now comes the most famous twist in this story, and with it, one of the biggest misconceptions. Many people believe that Velcro was invented by NASA, that it was created specifically for space missions. It's a great story, but it isn't true. And now it's time to set the record straight. The truth is even more interesting. Velcro was invented by a Swiss engineer in the 1940s, long before the space age began. NASA didn't invent it. NASA used it. In zero gravity, objects tend to drift away. Tools, equipment, samples, and everyday items can all float through the cabin. Velcro offered a simple solution. With a single press, astronauts could secure things to walls, panels, or their suits and keep them exactly where they were needed. It was space exploration that made Velcro famous around the world. People saw it in footage from space missions and assumed it must be a space-age invention, a technology created for astronauts. In reality, the opposite was true. It was an Earth-born invention, inspired by a common weed, that proved so practical and effective that it eventually made its way into orbit. Take a moment and think about what de Mestral actually did. He didn't create something out of thin air. He discovered a solution that nature had already developed. For millions of years, nature had been perfecting those tiny hooks. All de Mestral did was look closely enough to understand how they worked and then recreate the idea. This approach has a name. This is called biomimicry. It may sound like a complex term, but the meaning is simple. Bio means life. Mimicry means imitation. Imitation of life. It's when engineers and scientists solve human problems by observing plants, animals, and insects. Nature is a laboratory that has been running for billions of years, and within it, countless solutions have already been tested and refined. Velcro is far from the only example. Once you start looking, it becomes clear that nature has inspired dozens of human inventions. Many of them are part of your everyday life, even if you never realize where the idea originally came from. Where do we encounter Velcro today? Almost everywhere. Children's shoes that a child can fasten on their own, jackets and backpacks, watch straps, sports gear, even in medicine, like blood pressure cuffs that gently wrap around the arm. It has become a quiet hero of everyday life. Think about how many times you've heard that sound in your life. That familiar ripping noise when Velcro is pulled apart? You heard it in childhood. You still hear it today. And that sound is a direct descendant of a single autumn walk in the Alps of one person who didn't ignore a small detail, but stopped to ask a question. And that is the main lesson of this story. The answers are often already out there, in forests, in fields, at the bottom of the ocean, on a butterfly's wing, beneath your feet, in something as ordinary as a prickly burr. Nature has already found many of the solutions. What it asks from us is surprisingly little. To pause, to look closely, and to ask a question. What do you notice? Maybe right now, there's something small near you that everyone else would walk past without a second thought. A detail in nature hiding a possible answer. The story of de Mestral reminds us that great discoveries often begin with curiosity, the willingness to see something extraordinary in what first appears completely ordinary. And that brings our story to a close. But this is just the beginning of a much larger journey. A whale that helped make wind turbines more efficient, a kingfisher that inspired faster trains, a mosquito that led to nearly painless injections, and a desert beetle that can drink water from fog. Nature is full of hidden designs, and we've only scratched the surface. We'll uncover them together. Nature is the oldest and wisest workshop on the planet. It has been running for billions of years, without blueprints and without mistakes that cannot be corrected. Everything that has survived has done so for a reason. Every form has been tested by time. And when we learn from it, we become a little wiser ourselves. Thank you for being with us. If you find the idea inspiring that nature is our greatest teacher, share this story with someone who still enjoys being amazed by the world. We're already preparing the next one, because nature still holds so many secrets waiting to be discovered. See you next time.